Which matchups should we target and which should we avoid in week 3 for fantasy football? We're talking about that in today's video. As always, like and subscribe to the channel. We put one of these videos out each and every single week. We're getting good responses from these. Appreciate you guys watching these, liking these, and subscribing to it. Currently, we are on a hit rate of 60% versus a miss rate of 40%. So we've hit on 60% of our good and bad calls. We've missed on 40% of them, which is pretty damn good in my opinion, because again, I mentioned this every video. We're not talking about the obvious starts. We're not talking about Bijan Robinson. If he has a bad matchup, it doesn't matter. You're starting him. We're talking about more of the fringe players. Should you be starting these guys? You'll see by the rankings, the consensus rankings, this is half PPR, by the way, that these are fringe players that you can make an argument to start. You can make an argument to bench. First one, starting off with the quarterbacks, we have the good matchups, in my opinion, for quarterbacks. I have Brock Purdy coming up number 1. Now, this is based on the offensive line versus defensive line. This is based on, are they going to have time to throw the ball? Are they going to have good protection or not? Other factors come into play here. Can you, do you make a good throw or a bad throw? Do you have a bad game or good game? Do your receivers have good and bad games? A lot of other stuff comes into play here. But in terms of the offensive line and defensive line matchup, I like San Francisco going up against Los Angeles, who's completely beat up. I like it overall for San Francisco to win this matchup, to protect Purdy, to give him time. Now, Deebo Samuel's going to be out. That's not great for Purdy. Ayuk's there, Kittle's there, CMC's not there. So am I telling you should start him? No, this is more for if you're debating on whether or not to start him. This is more for deeper leagues, maybe for even DFS if you want to take a shot on. I do think that the matchup for the offensive line for the 49ers is going to be pretty good, and you should potentially be targeting it. Another player here is Aaron Rodgers. We actually put Aaron Rodgers last week as a good matchup, and it worked out. He was QB 12. He was 15.1 points, which you're going to take from Aaron Rodgers if he's your starting quarterback because you drafted him so late. I do think he has another good matchup here. The Jets offensive line tonight, Thursday Night Football, versus the Patriots defensive line. I think there's going to be there's a chance for the Jets to win. They've actually been pretty good at protecting Rodgers to start off the season. They have just a 24% pressure rate, which is is in the bottom third of the entire NFL. So only giving up a pressure on 24% of Rodgers' dropbacks, which is pretty good. Patriots have been good, not great in terms of their pressure rate. Their pressure rate is around 28%, which is, I think, also in the bottom half. So those two things combined, good protection from the Jets offensive line to start the year. Not so much pressure from the Patriots defensive line. I like this matchup for Rodgers. I think he could be, once again, a low-end QB1. And then Jared Goff. Jared Goff has been very, very, very disappointing because I was telling people to draft Goff because of his starts, the start that he was going to have, the Rams and the Buccaneers, in a dome, at home, target Jared Goff, and it just hasn't worked out. But I do think this week, the best offensive line versus defensive line matchup in terms of a positive sense for the offensive line does go to the Lions, in my opinion, going up against the Cardinals. So I think the Lions could dominate them at the offensive line, both in the run and the pass game. That being said, Goff is always a candidate too. They get down to the goal line, they hand the ball off. So he could throw for 300 yards and 0 touchdowns, right? And the Lions could put up 28 points. So that is a concern. But if you were going to, this is kind of the last week, in my opinion, to start Goff. If you are still starting him, if he doesn't do well, then I'm moving on. I'm moving on from him. Bad matchups. Again, I don't like the offensive line, defensive line matchup for this quarterback. And Jacksonville, once again, Trevor Lawrence comes up again. I mentioned Trevor Lawrence is a bad matchup against the Browns last week, and he was one of our hits. Trevor Lawrence, once again, to me, does not have a great matchup, right? He just doesn't. I don't think he has that good of a matchup. Jacksonville, in my opinion, I'm not too excited about it. Going up against the Bills, I kind of want to avoid it if I can. And also, Trevor Lawrence just hasn't produced this year, so he's kind of an easy bench. especially going up against the Bills in that defense. I don't like it. I don't like it for Jacksonville at all. I would definitely be benching Lawrence. Baker. Now, Baker, we mentioned, was a bad matchup for the offensive defensive line, and it kind of played out that way. Aiden Hutchinson had 4.5 sacks. It actually didn't really matter for Baker. He still had a really good game. He was QB5 overall. I think he's like QB1 or 2 overall in the season. Again, I don't really love this matchup for Tampa Bay. Like, I'm not a huge fan of this matchup against the Broncos. But that being said, it's against the Broncos, and I'm not going to worry too much about it. I do think there's a chance the Broncos get some pressure on the Buccaneers, but I'm not going to necessarily avoid this matchup for Baker Mayfield against the Broncos. I'm just saying, I wouldn't be surprised if they do get a little bit of pressure on him. I also don't love a couple other ones, but you're going to start these guys. Lamar Jackson against the Cowboys. I didn't put him in here because you're going to start him. Don't love that matchup. Stafford against the 49ers. I don't think anyone's starting Stafford, considering all their injuries and things like that. And then Kyler against Detroit. Once again, I don't love that matchup, but Kyler's he's one of those quarterbacks that he can avoid pressure and make plays on his legs. So I didn't have him in here as well. On to the running backs. I have Zach Moss with a good matchup. Now, Zach Moss has been interesting. RB21 week 1, RB42 week 2. His usage is great. He's getting 65-70% of the snaps. He's out there on third downs, on goal lines, on 2-minute drills. He's splitting the early down carries with Chase Brown. It's kind of what you want. If you can't have it all, this is kind of the archetype for a running back that you want. I like the matchup for Zach Moss going up against Washington. Washington is going to be a team we need to target in fantasy football. I like this matchup for Zach Moss. For the Bengals overall, I love it. I think they could be scoring a lot of points, which could lead to touchdowns for Zach Moss, could lead for catches for Zach Moss. The Washington Commanders give up 1.5 yards before contact. That is 4th worst in the entire NFL, meaning the running back's not even being touched before he has a yard and a half before he's even being touched, which means he's probably going to get 2, 3, 4 yards, almost 3-4 yards every carry, right? So love that matchup for Zach Moss. I think he's going to have a good, top 24 week. DeAndre Swift. Now, I'm not saying you should be starting DeAndre Swift because, man, they've been god awful. They just haven't. I don't understand what the Bears are doing, really. Like, they went out and paid DeAndre Swift. They have a rookie quarterback, and basically what it means is they've given him 24 carries over the last 2 weeks, right? Now, he did have 4 catches. His efficiency has been terrible. So maybe it's more on DeAndre Swift than anything. He averaged 1.3 yards per attempt against Houston, 3 yards per attempt against Tennessee in week 1. Now, that being said, I do like this matchup for the Bears. I think it's a pretty good matchup. It's not fantastic. It's pretty good against the Colts. Bears against the Colts. I think they're going to establish the run a little bit. They're going to take a little bit off of Caleb Williams' shoulders, stop letting him get just absolutely lit up. Their offensive line is not great at pass protection. So I think this potentially could be a good game for Swift. That being said, I'm not forcing him into my lineup unless I have to, because he just hasn't been good. He's been RB41 and RB37 the first 2 weeks. I'm not necessarily saying starting him, but if you're on that decision where Swift is one of your guys, you're potentially, thinking about starting, I don't hate it. I don't hate it this week because I do love that matchup. Some bad matchups for running backs. Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson to me, I'm sorry. Brian Robinson's a good matchup. I don't know why I said bad. Brian Robinson is once again a good matchup here. Brian Robinson has been really damn good. You look at those numbers here. I've never been a big Brian Robinson fan. Didn't like him coming out of college. Didn't believe what he did last year was going to be sustainable. I've been wrong, and I'll admit that. I've been absolutely wrong about him. He is looking like a top 15 running back to start off the year. RB12 in week 1, RB16 in week 2. He had 17 carries last week, 12 carries the week before. He's caught 4 passes, so about 2 passes a game. He's always a threat to get a touchdown when they get to the goal line. They just didn't score a touchdown last week. And I love this matchup for him against Cincinnati. I think they're going to be able to run the ball on Cincinnati. And I think you're going to see them attack Cincinnati this way. The Isaiah Pacheco against Cincinnati had 19 carries for 90 yards, averaged over 4.7 yards per attempt. And Ramondre Stevenson had a big game against Cincinnati, 25 carries for 120 yards. I think the way to beat Cincinnati is to control the game, run the ball. I think we're expecting a big game from Brian Robinson. I don't even think he's being debated as like starting. I think you're just starting him. But if you needed just a little bit more confidence to start him, I think he has a really, really good matchup. 3 bad matchups at the running back position. Devin Singletary. He's tough because he's getting all the work, and that's what you want to see. It's like, all right, are you out there? Are you getting opportunities? Well, he is. He is. 10 carries, 4 catches week 1, 16 carries, 1 catch week 2. He has played 70 and 79% of the snaps the last 2 weeks, respectively. So he's out there, and he's their main guy. But I don't love this matchup for him. I don't love the matchup for Devin Singletary going against the Browns. The Browns are the team we need to avoid. That being said, they're not going to beat the Browns through the air, because that's an even worse matchup, is their pass protection versus the Browns pass rush and Daniel Jones throwing into that secondary. So they are going to try and run the ball. I just don't think they're going to be successful. Cleveland's only giving up 1.07 yards before contact. That's 3rd best in the entire NFL. So on average, the running back gets a touch. He's getting just over a yard before he's getting contacted. So don't love that. I think it's going to be a bad game for Singletary. Be careful chasing that RB18 finish he had last week. Travis Etienne. Jacksonville in general, I just don't love this matchup for Jacksonville against Buffalo. The Buffalo's defenses look legit the first 2 weeks. Etienne has been very disappointing. Barely, he's like RB, I think 25 on the year or something. Was RB 20 last week. 13.3 points, which is pretty good. It actually seems kind of high for RB 20. So those are solid numbers. I'm just double checking and make sure I recorded that right. That ETN had that many points there. 13.3 RB 20. So, but we expected him to be a top 12 guy. That hasn't happened so far this year. And now he has, a bad matchup for the offensive line run blocking for Jacksonville against Buffalo and their run defense. So Buffalo's pretty good at only giving up 1.21 yards per before contact. And Jacksonville is only allowing their running back 1.19 yards before contact. So their running back is getting contacted just over a yard, less than a yard and a half past the line of scrimmage. So don't love this matchup for ETN. Again, you're probably starting him because you drafted him in the 2nd round. Just potentially expect a bad matchup. And the reason why I bring these guys up that seem to be obvious starts is because, there's other guys that have come on. Brian Robinson, who we just talked about, Jordan Mason. Maybe you have both these guys and you don't need to start ETN. This is a potential, bench ETN game because I don't love this matchup against against Buffalo. And then Najee Harris, who he is what he is. Like, I think we know at this point what Najee Harris is. Like, he's going to get touches. Is he going to do anything with those touches? Like, I don't know. He has 37 carries over the first 2 weeks. That has to be in the top 5 or 10 in the NFL. 37 touches. He has to be, it's really 39 touches. It's 37 carries. That has to be top 5 or top 10 in the NFL. He's just not producing. He's averaging, he averaged 4.1 yards per attempt against Denver, but only 69 yards, 70 yards against Atlanta. And again, I just don't really love this matchup for Najee Harris going up against the Chargers, who actually have been a little bit better this year in defending the run, right? So, I mean, do you want to target them? Because you know that Najee Harris is going to get these touches. Like, sure, you can do that. That's fine. But, I think they only gave up 71 yards rushing to the Raiders, 90 yards rushing to the Panthers. Like, they are doing pretty good. So the Chargers are. And I don't love this matchup for the Steelers. So would potentially be benching Najee Harris. On to the wide receivers. Four good matchups, I believe, here. Khalil Shakir, he was on our list last week. And honestly, considering what we expect from Khalil Shakir in half PPR, he was wide receiver 34. a little bit better in PPR, but in half PPR is wide receiver 34, which honestly is fine because that's what you're expecting. If Khalil Shakir is a wide receiver 3 for you in a 3 wide receiver flex league, that's what you'll take. I once again think he has a good matchup. Again, going against Jacksonville, he seems to be the wide receiver who's going to be producing for Buffalo consistently. Keon Coleman, a little bit inconsistent. Dalton Kincaid hasn't been consistent. Curtis Samuel not playing enough. Khalil Shakir might be the guy after all the questions. We'll see. We'll see after this week, but he's going up against Jerry and Jones. I think they can win with that matchup. So I like this matchup for Khalil Shakir. I think he can be, again, a top 36 receiver. And if he catches a touchdown, he's going to be top 24. I think he's going to give you similar to what he did last week, 5 for 50. And if he catches that touchdown, which he will, or bust off a big play, he's going to be a top 24 guy. Rashid Shaheed, he's kind of a must start at this point. Like, he comes into the year as like a boom bust player, but he's boomed the first 2 weeks. So you got to kind of just start him, right? Saints offense does look legit after 2 weeks. I think we're just starting Shaheed if you needed any more convincing. I love this matchup going against Philly. Philly's one of those teams, at least early on, we're going to be targeting wide receivers against Philly. We talked about Drake London last week. It worked out because he caught the touchdown. But he's going up against Avonte Maddox. Most of his snaps will be against Avonte Maddox, I believe. And I like that matchup for Rashid Shaheed. Fire him up. Ladd McConkey has been interesting. We saw him catch a touchdown in week 1. He was wide receiver 20, and then we saw him have a bad game. Chargers didn't really need to do much. Wide receiver 64. He's a fringe player. He's wide receiver 39 according to consensus rankings. This is a little bit more for deep leagues, but I like this matchup for him against Beanie Bishop Jr. in the slot against Pittsburgh. I think they can find a way to win through that way. And they're going to have to get the ball out quickly because defensively, Pittsburgh can rush the passer. They can absolutely rush the passer. And so I like this for McConkey getting those short area targets if they're trying to get the ball out quickly. So Ladd McConkey, if he's, in debate to potentially start him in deeper leagues. And then Christian Kirk has been absolutely disappointing. I don't expect anyone to start Christian Kirk. That being said, if there's a week that Christian Kirk's going to do well, it's going to be against Buffalo. I think you can beat Buffalo in the middle of the field because they basically say, don't beat us deep. We don't want you to beat us deep. We don't care about if you take those short stuff. You can have all that short area stuff. Just don't beat us deep. That's what they're saying. Look at week 1, right? Look at week 1. Who put up a bunch of yards for the Arizona Cardinals in terms of receiving, right? It was Greg Dortch. He was their number 1 receiver, 47 yards, 6 catches. If you get that from Christian Kirk, you're happy, right? And Marvin Harrison Jr. was shut down. Buffalo Bills, week 2, who put up the best numbers for Miami? It was Jonnu Smith, short area targets over the middle of the field, right? And Achane as well, right? Achane and Smith. Achane 7 for 69, Jonnu Smith 6 for 53. I think Christian Kirk, they're going to try and shut down Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis, not allow that to happen. Christian Kirk, I think, especially with Ingram potentially out, should have a good game. I'm not saying you should start him because he's been god-awful. He's been absolutely awful. So, and then into our bad matchups, Brian Thomas, just for those reasons I just said. I think they're going to try and limit the deep threat, and that's going to open things up for Christian Kirk. I don't think Brian Thomas is going to have a great game. Don't mind if you want to start him because he's been good to start the year. He's been a low-end wide receiver 2 to start the year. But just be warned, be wary of this matchup. I don't love it going up against Benford and Rasul Douglas. Michael Pittman, to me, is another bad matchup. Pittman's been bad. I'm worried about Michael Pittman because he's not going to catch the deep touchdown passes when they get in the goal line area. They're going to run the ball with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson. I think Pittman could have another bad game here. I think the Bears defense is legit. Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, I don't like either of those guys matching up against Pittman. Josh Downs could be back, and that's even more of a problem for Pittman. So if you can potentially bench him, he's tough because you drafted him as a starter. He hasn't been good, and you still want to kind of start him, especially if you haven't found a replacement for him. But I just think it could be a bad matchup here. Xavier Worthy, we've seen what Worthy is so far, and I think he's going to be like this at least for the first several weeks. He's a boom bust wide receiver. We saw the boom and we saw the bust. Wasn't much difference in terms of touches and targets, but he could take one, he could score a 50-yard touchdown, or he could just put up 3.2 points. I'm probably going to lean on benching him this week. I don't love the matchup for Worthy against Mike Hughes and AJ Terrell of the Atlanta Falcons. I think they can kind of slow him down and shut him down. So if you can bench Worthy, I do like him as a wide receiver 3 in a 3 wide receiver league just because of that boom bust aspect. Like, you can live if your wide receiver 3 puts up 3 points, right? And hopefully you have other players who can win the matchups for you. But he's guaranteeing you a win if he booms. If he puts up 20 points, you're most likely like 90% chance you're going to win because he's your wide receiver 3. And then into the tight ends here, Jake Ferguson, I think, has a really good matchup if he comes back. I think he was limited at practice on Wednesday. I'm recording this Thursday afternoon. Don't have Thursday practice in. If he's a full participant on Friday, I like the matchup for Jake Ferguson going up against Trenton Simpson of the Baltimore Ravens. Think this is a really, really good matchup for him. And I would be targeting him. Dalton Kincaid. I also like the matchup here for Dalton Kincaid. Man, this is tough because you're starting Kincaid because you drafted him to be your starter, but what do you do if he puts up another dud? Now, he was tight end 14, but only 5.3 points. It just shows you how bad the tight end position is. I do like this matchup for him going up against Jacksonville. I think he could finally have a breakout game here, maybe a squeaky wheel game, get him involved like we all thought they would. I hope they do. Dalton Schultz is another good matchup here. I don't think you're going to be starting Dalton Schultz. He hasn't been good to start the year. You probably didn't even draft him as a starter. Just saying, like, if you do play in deeper leagues, if your tight end is hurt and you're desperate and you're looking for someone on the waiver wire, you're playing DFS, I do think Dalton Schultz has a good matchup here against Ivan Pace Jr. And so, yeah, I think there's a potential good matchup, a good game for Schultz going up against the Vikings. And it could be maybe a high-scoring game. Also, Kyle Pitts. I think there's an intrigue there with Kyle Pitts because look at what the Chiefs have given up to tight ends the first 2 weeks. You had Isaiah Likely and his huge game on the opening night, and we know what he did. There's also Mike Gesicki last week for the Bengals, put up 7 for 91. Now, I'm a little bit hesitant because I do think that's a kind of a product of them focusing on shutting down both Andrews and Chase, and that's what led the other guy. I don't know if they're going to do that for Drake London, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Pitts does have a good matchup. 2 bad matchups here. I don't like Pat Freiermuth's matchup against Denzel Perriman. Freiermuth's a fringe starter in my opinion. I don't hate it. He's been top 15 the last 2 weeks. Hasn't been a difference maker. But if I can avoid starting Pat Freiermuth, I think I'm going to. And then Dallas Goedert is the last one here. Dallas Goedert, don't love the matchup here against Demario Davis of the Saints. Demario Davis just keeps doing it and doing it and doing it, and the dude's ridiculous. Like, he's been he should be a Hall of Famer considering the guy's 35 years old and has been one of the best linebackers in the NFL for like 4 straight years. So he's awesome. I think he gives Dallas Goedert some fits here. I think it's more of a Devonta Smith and then a run game type of game. So running the ball, Saquon Barkley. So there you have it, guys. Again, 60% hit rate for players that we said you should either start or bench, which is really good considering these are all kind of fringe starters. Most of these guys are fringe starters. Appreciate you all again for the support on this video. Like and subscribe to the channel. Catch you guys all in the next video.